welcome to chapter 1 and the first game. So it better be something special, I hear you say. Well, hopefully all examples that I use throughout this course are special. Otherwise, what the hell are they doing in this course? So we start with one of my favourite players of all time. Probably my favourite player of all time. And that is the infamous, famous ex-world champion, Mikhail Tal. Now, Tal was a fascinating character, brilliant world champion, and he was known really for his sacrificial play and his uncompromising and very risky attacks. If you put a lot of Tal's attacks on a computer, the computer will say that they're rubbish, but they worked in a very good practical setting. And that's something we've got to bear in mind when we are doing attacks. It's not always what the computer says. You're playing another human most of the time. Or let's hope so. Otherwise, we don't want to find out your opponent is cheating. But every great player has many sides to them. And as well as being a brilliant attacking player, Mikhail Tal was a brilliant endgame player. And people forget about this. They assume that attacking players can't play endgames. They assume that, they attack, they want to sacrifice pieces, they don't want to play endings. But one thing you must be able to do, yourselves, everyone, if you want to get to that good level of chess, is not be a one-way street. What I mean by that is, don't just confine yourself to playing in one way. You have to be an all-round player. You might prefer playing certain positions, but you have to be adaptable. You have to sometimes play endings if you don't like them, or tactics if you don't like them. And in this chapter, which is all about evaluating positions and how you go about evaluating positions and formulating plans, the strategy that you take into a game, the strategy that you have in a position, we see Mikhail Tal play in a way that a lot of people would think is completely alien to him. And that's why I picked this game. And what I mean by that is he goes for a quick exchange off of queens and he outplays Timman in the ending. Timman being the higher rated player at the time. This was played in 1985 after Mikhail Tal's peak in the candidates playoff. But I think it's one of my favourite games. It's really smooth and it's a great way to start us off in this evaluation and strategy chapter. Now, we have Tal with the white pieces, and another thing I would like to say about this is Tal was the master at using his pieces. We're going to talk about this more a bit later on, and I'll come to a position very soon to demonstrate that. But he was brilliant with his pieces. I call the pieces the organs. They are like your heart. They're like your lungs. They're the things that beat inside your body, the pieces. The pawns, I would say, are your skeleton. So you have two different elements to your chest position and to your body. They keep your posture. They keep your good posture, hopefully. They can be broken. They can jab forwards. But it's the organs that make them move. And when we go about evaluating a position, we've always got to consider the skeleton and the organs. So the skeleton is the pawn structure and the organs are the pieces. If our pawn structure is bad, we better have good pieces. If our pieces are bad, we better have a good pawn structure. And we've got to evaluate these things constantly. So in this one, the king was the winning piece. But let's get to the position I want to really first discuss. Now, Timman has played the French defence on and off for a number of years. And Mikhail Tal famously an e4 attacking player. And in the standard French defence position, we have knight d2. Another thing I would like to say is I pitched this course at quite high ELO rating. I'm going to try to explain it for beginners as well, but I'm going to go through the opening moves quicker than I would do normally to get to the key positions. This is not an opening course. It's about middle games and, how you're going to improve your game generally. You can go and learn an opening thing anywhere in the world, but that's not how I think you should improve, and that's not what this course is about. And now knight to f6. Now, this is the move I actually play in the French defence. It's the most dynamic move. Tal now pushes on with the main line. The knight drops back, and now c3. And you can already see that the skeleton of the position for white is very pleasant. And remember, evaluation is all about pawn structure, pieces, how those dynamics work together. Black has to play c5 to break up that one. This is all theory. And now bishop d3, both sides developing, knight c6, pressurizing d4, knight to e2. This is the old mainline Tarish. Capture on d4, and now black reverts to his second energetic break, f6. And this is another move you often have to play in the French defense. And again, this is using your structure, your skeleton, in an energetic way. So you're trying to get your organs, your pieces, working behind that pawn move. Now, white takes on f6, knight takes f6, and you can see by removing the e pawn, black gets access to these two squares. But after a couple more moves, knight f3, bishop d6, it's time to evaluate. I mean, generally, we should really evaluate every time the pawn structure is changed. And this is something I want to talk about with valuation. So, in actual fact, after the move f6 and a capture on f6, it's time to re-evaluate. Because every time the skeleton changes, the dynamics change. So every time a pawn capture happens, a pawn change happens, I would suggest you re-evaluate and work out, how did that pawn structure help me? How did it help my opponent? How does it change my plans? How does it change my opponent's plans? We talked about black getting these two squares, but what we haven't talked about is how it benefits white. And throughout this course, I will get you to try and pause along with me so you can try to work out the answers for yourself. And this one should be pretty clear. Again, I'm trying to pitch this at high level, so I hope you all understand about weak squares and backwards pawns, etc. And this is something that this pawn structure and this pawn exchange has created. It's created an outpost on e5. An outpost is a square that cannot be attacked by a pawn or controlled by a pawn. So if white can never get a piece into that square, then black can never cover it with d6 or f6. So therefore controlling that square. So this square is an outpost, and also this pawn is what we call a backwards pawn. It can't be defended by another pawn ever because they've moved away. It's weak, it's quite hard to move, and it's also on a half open line. So if white gets a rook there, it's going to be a weakness. So these are things we need to consider. Black is therefore going for piece activity rather than a structural advantage. And again, you've got to be thinking like this every move in chess, even if you don't know the opening so well. How did that structure happen? Okay, well, I'm white here. I realize that black now has some active pieces, but he has a backwards pawn, a weak square. So maybe my middle game plan should be really revolve around these weaknesses. Often chess should be revolved around that. Finding your opponent's weaknesses, pressurizing that, making sure your opponent's pluses can't hurt you too much. Chess is about two things, really. Doing your own plans, stopping your opponent's plans. So that's what we want to do. And now a very interesting idea from Macau Tao. In this position, castle's kingside is the main move, when white will try to play bishop f4 soon. Now, after, let's say, castle's bishop f4, another thing you have to consider, if you're offering an exchange of pieces, obviously, if you're offering it, you better make sure that the exchange of pieces is going to help you and not help your opponent. So, in this position, who does this exchange of pieces benefit and why? Another thing I really want to talk about when you're evaluating, and we're going to get into this course bit by bit, I'm going to keep repeating some things because they're so important, is the whys. What I mean by whys is, why am I moving that piece there? What is that achieving? And when should I do it? So just think whys. When, why, what? What am I trying to do? What am I trying to achieve? When do I play that there? What is my opponent trying to do? It's all the whys, really. And in this position, what we're trying to do is obviously exchange off bishops. And why does this position benefit white? Did you get it right? Well, it's to increase our control over this outpost. Black had a bishop defending that one, that e5 square. And now by removing that bishop, we get more control of the outpost. That's one thing. And another thing is, we're talking about black's active pieces. We want to get rid of our opponent's benefits, which are his active pieces, and we swapped off one of his main active pieces, his bishop on d6. So we're getting rid of his positives while accentuating, making our positives more important. So after castles, Timman actually normally plays queen c7 to stop this idea, line I play. So Macau Tao now played a very rare move, bishop to f4. And bishop to f4 is a rare move, but a very interesting move. And again, all the games I've picked from this course have had a big effect on my development. Maybe the games I picked are really why I've become a grandmaster, hence why I've picked them. And I want to teach you everything I've learned from these games. You're getting the easy run. You're getting this in however long this course will be. I had to learn all these things over the course of years. So even though this course is a bit pricey, you are getting the accelerated version. And one thing I now try to do, and I've done throughout my life, is look at old games. This is not even that old, but it is 1985. Ideas that are rarely played in modern chess. This is when I'm doing my opening research. Bishop f4 is a rare move, not played often in modern day chess. But I like bringing back old ideas, forgotten ideas to life. Most people, they just don't think this way. They only follow modern theory. I don't think this is the right way to play, because everyone follows modern theory. Why not go the other way and try to think, what does my opponent not know? And this move is a real shocker. It's got the right positional ideas. So obviously if black castles, we swap off black's active piece, we get a little bit more control of this square. Now one thing you might be thinking is, let's say black plays e5. Well, this is one way he can get rid of two of his disadvantages. But remember, every time the pawn structure changes, what do? Evaluate. Reevaluate the position, reevaluate the strategy. So look at the new weaknesses that are being created, and also in both positions. And after this move, which I've played as black in similar positions, it's a new pawn structure. We probably have to take this, and we can make mass exchanges on this square. And how do you evaluate this position? You've got to be able to evaluate positions in the right way. I mean, again, you can pause here if you want to, but one thing, again, that really helped me was picking random positions from a chess book. Let me just get one now. This is a bit random. I don't know really what I'm doing here. We don't want an ending book. You know, I'm just doing this off the top of my head. I've got loads of chess books around me. Right, random position. There we go. And I have a look at that position. I get a chess magazine without looking at any of the text, and I do two things. I look at the pawn structure. Well, I do more than two, but start with two. Pawn structure, pieces. And I evaluate who's got the better pawn structure, who's got the better pieces. And then I start formulating plans, and then I make an evaluation who is better. That's what you've got to do here. Pawn structure. Who's got the better pawn structure? Well, this is an isolated pawn. It can become, well, it is a pass pawn, you could say as well. It could become dangerous later on. But at the moment, it's very well blockaded. It can't be defended by another pawn. Therefore, it is really just a weakness, and it can be attacked by white. So white doesn't have any weak pawns. So this really is a better pawn structure for white. If we look at the pieces, well, this bishop is very strong. It's on a very nice square, controlling both areas of the board. The knight is not particularly good, so this would give us indications how we strategize. If we can find out, okay, that knight's not really doing anything, then we have to realize we need to do something with it. Maybe knight d4 then. You can't take it because the bishop takes h7, a nice central square, and we start coming up with the right plans. But let's remember to also do this with our opponent's pieces. Our opponent's queen is quite nicely positioned. I mean, I'm going to put the knight there, I feel, in this kind of position. But his bishop is okay, but in general, white should be slightly better because of the pawn structure here, just to let you know about that transformation. Anyway, on with the game. So here, Timman played Theory's recommended plan, which is bishop takes f4, and now trying to take advantage of the fact that white has not castled, queen to a5 check. Obviously, Tao does not want to move his king and give up castling rights, so he goes queen d2, and he goes for the ending. So again, every time a major change happens, you need to reevaluate the position. So the queens have now come off. Who should positionally this benefit, and who should it benefit tactically? Two things you should always consider. the positional considerations and the tactical ones. Well, positionally, I would say it should benefit white. Why? Whenever one side, white or black, has a structural problem, black has this structural problem with the pawn and the square there, weak square, weak pawn. Generally, the more pieces that get exchanged, the more that positional problem becomes a real problem. Because often you can defend a positional problem with lots of piece ideas and tactics, but if those tactics disappear, you're left with this gaping hole, you know, like the elephant in the room. You know, let's say you had an elephant in a massive crowd. Probably not good to have crowds at all at the moment. I don't know where this is going to go out, but you get my drift. If you had an elephant in a massive crowd of thousands of people, you might not spot the elephant. But if all the people leave the room, the elephant will be very clear. That's the same with his structural weaknesses. So generally the queen exchange helps white. And he can also now get a rook here. So it kind of looks very good for white. But tactically, we can see that there might be some ideas of the knight coming into e4 with a check. Got to look at the pieces, their energy behind them, and a rook getting on the f-file. So energetically, piecewise, black has to really play energetic here. And this is when you got to see the warning bells. If you realise, if I was black here, I'd be like, right, well, if I just sit here, I'm going to get in loads of trouble positionally. I need to come up with a very sharp tactical plan. And that's why black plays castles. And now, after the natural rook to e1, knight to e4 check. And this is the correct way to play. If you're starting to get in positional troubles, you have to take drastic action. You know, you have to evaluate that you're getting positional problems and not just sit there and let your opponent ride over you, you know, wash you away with a big bloody, there you go, tidal wave. You've got to literally, right, oh, hang on a minute. Oh, I've got to do something. I don't want a tsunami coming at me. I mean, you don't just watch. If you had a chance, you were sitting on the beach with a little margarita, you know, enjoying the sunshine, and all of a sudden a tsunami was just coming towards you in slow motion, let's say slow motion, and you saw it coming towards you, you probably wouldn't be like, yes, that's a very big wave. Let me just finish my margarita, maybe a little bit of sex on the beach, and we'll see what happens. You'd be like, bloody hell, there's a wave coming towards me. I need to do something now. Toodle off we go. I might even have to drop my margarita because, you know, we have to make sacrifices in life. And that's what you need to do in chess. Positional problems, stuff needs to be done. Knight e4, good move. And again, we're not going to talk about too in-depth tactics even in this chapter. It's, you know, well, we will do in some of the games, but we're mainly positional and evaluation strategies. And the point of this is white now has a choice. If king e3, which tries to keep things under control, it's a fairly simple tactic. Knight takes f2, which is going to win a pawn anyway. Did Macau Tao miss this move? No. His idea was a very imaginative pawn sacrifice. Bishop takes e4, and now rook takes f4, and now the amazing bishop d3. And this is a very high level way of thinking, and this game impressed me so much. I think a lot of people would just think, well, hang on a minute, I can just win this pawn. Fantastic. But after this move, and now a forced sequence, and again, I suggest you pause now to work out how white gets any compensation here, because Timman's played very well. He's activated his pieces. He's won a pawn. What is Macau Tao's idea? He loves sacrificing, but not normally without queens on the board. So you've got to work out what is Tao's idea. So do pause. You can always press play, can't you? Pause now. You back with me? You can still pause? I'm going to be doing this throughout the course, telling you to pause. You don't need to, but if you want to get the maximum out of this course, I suggest you try to work out what the players were thinking. Think like Tao. Don't just be too lazy. We can always do that. You still learn a bit, but if you really want to get maximum, think when I say pause, because they're key moments. Well, the best way to do this, it's all about the active king and these dart squares. And after king to e3, we have a forced sequence of moves. Obviously, this is a minor fork. e5 is just met by knight takes. So knight takes f3. I hope you calculated this far. King takes, knight takes e1, rook takes e1. And this is the time to evaluate. Now, clearly here, black is a central pawn up. So pawn structure-wise, black is better. But there are, well, some problems with the pawn structure, I should say, is that when you have pawns on light squares, the opposite colour squares become very weak. And this is a very typical motif in the French defence. Because you start your first two moves with e6 and d5, you often weaken the dark squares. And later on in the middle game ending, white can try to exchange off these two pawns and take control of these dark squares with his pieces. You will see this idea in many great victories. So also, what does white have? Well, again, we look at the organs being the pieces, and white has the active pieces here. The active pieces to come to the c-file. Good bishop. Black's piece is bad. Very good king. And this king is the hero. So white has sufficient compensation. The game continues bishop d7, trying to develop. And now, of course, king to e5. And this is a very nice move because we have to always think what opponent's trying to do. In this case, rook to c8. And we have to try to work against that. If rook to c8 now, our king just dots in to d6, and we're going to win a pawn back with a better position. So in actual fact, here, black has some problems. Can black hold on to the pawn? The idea is just king here, win the e-pawn. And a very good tactic is if you can't hold on to a pawn, you should give a pawn up to get some activity yourself. So think of a way, again, you have to deal with bad positions. You're black now. What should you do as black here? And sometimes to relieve the pressure, as I said earlier, exchanges help. Now that you're a pawn up with black, you certainly want to think of exchanges, even if you have to give some material back. So pause now. Well, I think Timman came up with a very good idea. He went a6 and bishop to b5, exchanging off that bad bishop. I mean, passive defense, something like king f7 here is what a lot of weaker players would play. But after some move, maybe not king to d6, this is still possible, but I don't know, maybe here black has rook to d8. But I think a better move is rook c1, trying to come into c7. I actually believe that black's in a lot of trouble. You can't allow the rook in. Maybe you want to exchange off like this. But did you miss the idea king d6? And this king, what a hero. It's a real problem. King c7 is going to win, is going to actually win the bishop. So, yeah, it's amazing. This king is a hero. So you have to be very, very careful. Very, very careful when you try passive defense. So a6 is a good move. Black aims for exchanges to relieve the pressure. And we had the exchange on b5, and now rook takes e6. And here, white is now fractionally better because of his active king, and some of these pawns are weak. d4 was now played by Timman. If rook takes a2, white would first go rook to e2, defending all of his nice pawns, and then the king is going to rampage and start taking black's weak pawns. I don't like this for black. So d4 is forced, and now rook to e2 anyway. White is relying on the king, this king, the hero. d3, rook to d2. Again, if rook takes a2, white will come c5, take on b5, and then try to take on b7. So rook c8, trying to stop the king coming. This is a clever idea. And now another clever idea, b4. Working against rook to c2, which happens anyway. And now rook takes d3. And this is a critical moment in the game. Clearly white is doing well. Black's pawns here are not great. It's now going to be equal material after black picks a pawn up, but the king activity is the telling thing. So clearly we can evaluate this as being better for white, but in these kind of positions, you really have to decide what pawn are you going to grab. Maybe you can have a think about that now. They might both draw, but one is a lot easier than the other. And this is to do with endgame technique, which you should always keep an eye on. In the game, black played rook takes a2, but this was a kind of irrelevant pawn. Black's idea should have been to try to get as many kingside pawns as possible and create counterplay by trying to get a passed pawn on the king side. In this kind of position, black can give up on the queen side. You can't act passively. You should always aim to go for the most active plan, and this is really true in a rook ending. And by taking on a2, allowing rook to f3, this king is now causing a lot of havoc, and you haven't really got any activity as black here. We'll come back to this in a minute. Had black taken on f2, it's now, with the help of table base, a draw. The main line going rook to d5, only now taking on a2 because you're going to try to grab these ones, and we get the following ending here. When, even though black's a pawn up, black is the one struggling because the b pawn is so strong, but black is just about in time. And you can see here black has this counterplay. If white goes wrong, black can win. But in these endings, it's normally who's got the furthest advanced pawn, and again, the activity of the king means it's black who struggles. But with some automatic moves here, let me just play them on the board. And here, well, we can try checking, but the king is going to come to a8 anyway, so you have to give your rook up for the pawn at some stage. And now a very clever drawing move, king g6. Black is actually drawing. Why do we put the king here? The idea is to shoulder the white king from coming to one of these two squares. So after king d6, we go king f5. And we stop the white king from moving, and we can rely on our h-pawn and support it, and it is actually a draw, even though, of course, this one is, black struggling to draw. In the game, let's have a look. Rook takes a2 was played, and after rook f3, rook c2, forced to stop the king coming across. Rook to f5, and now white has a similar plan as before. Black plays the final error, b6, and after this it's fairly simple technical win. There was another way to play this, and again it was looking for maximum activity with g6, and this is similar to the line before, where yes, we're going to lose both our b pawns, but at least we create counterplay by winning these guys. If you've ever got a choice between passive defense and activity, always pick the activity. And after something like this, we get a very similar line to before. So b6, I'll show you the end of the game. The difference here is that white doesn't have to lose all of these pawns because white has the time to do something with them, and he does that by playing h4. And now, given the chance, he will just push these pawns and then win the b pawns. The king is the key piece. It's always threatening to come across. It's stopping the black king from coming. And after the way the game went, and we'll have a look at this a little bit more, both sides playing normal moves, we can see that white goes into an ending where black is now struggling to get this passed pawn activity, and white just has to shield and push the b pawn up the board, which he does so with clever play. King out the way, and now you just have to get the rook out the way, and the pawn slowly advances. It doesn't matter if you win the pawn now because the b pawn is too strong, and this was actually resigned because you can look at this ending yourself, but in this case black is far too many tempos behind. Now, just before we move on, this shows the activity of the king. It was another amazing Tao game where Tao had the white pieces and he did a nearly identical plan. This was against Georgy Listine, Leningrad, US, obviously in Russia, 1956. So this is a long time before this last game, 30 odd years. And in this game, Tao was white, and it was really amusing that he played a similar idea. And we're just going to have a look very briefly at this one, where you had the same idea. The weakened dark squares. Okay, so we're seeing we can evaluate this better because we're getting pattern recognition. Our opponent's pawns are on light squares, so we can try to come in on those dark squares. Black can't easily cover the dark squares. Why not? Because he doesn't have a dark square bishop to try and cover them. And this again shows you that patterns and recognizing ideas can be very good. Obviously, to do such a plan, you have to really be careful that your king is going to be a strength and not a weakness, and you have to be very aware that your opponent does not have enough counterplay. You can't just start moving your king around if your opponent is very active. Like the last game, black's pieces are very bad, so to do such a maneuver, you have to work out he has little counterplay. And after some more moves we see here, look at the white king go. Black doesn't defend very well, but we can see it's nearly the same plan. The king infiltrates into the position, and basically Tao's idea is to win a pawn and pass this one. Even though black is material up, his passed pawns are very bad. And this is a very amusing structure we see on the king side, where you have 3 pawns versus 1. 1, 2, 3. But funnily enough, this one pawn, the G pawn, is good enough at holding up these 3 pawns. And you see this quite often in positions. And we can see that black struggles here with white just continuing his plan. And eventually white's king is the hero of the day. And white now is even a pawn up himself with what I'd say is a winning ending, because black's pawns are not going to create enough counterplay and white can get 2 passed pawns. Tao goes on to win. So what can we take away from that game before we move on to another example in this evaluation of strategy idea? Number 1, you have to, be adaptable and play lots of different types of positions, not just tactical positions. You have to play endings in order to be a strong player. Number 2, when you play an opening, you have to be very aware of what you're trying to achieve in the middle game and an even ending. If you're playing an opening and you don't know what you're trying to achieve, remember the whys. Why am I moving my piece here? What am I trying to achieve? What am I stopping my opponent playing? You shouldn't be playing that opening, or you should learn more about that opening. In this opening, after we have this main line position, it's very clear that Tao has a great understanding that with this move starting bishop f4, it's all about the dark square strategy. It's all about trying to control this square, and we even see the king do this even at the cost of a pawn. And you can see that this whole game plan that Tao created really started on move 12. He knew and he had planned out the whole game from move 1 all the way to the end. And this is what you need to do. It's like a story. You need to create your own story. When you play an opening, what do you want in the middle game? Where is it heading you in the end game? If you don't know that, you need to do more work, more research, and you need to work out where you're going. But let's move on to another example now. And I think it's a nice way to start with a little Tao magic there. Bit of a long video, but I want to go into as much detail as I can in these courses.